Great. We are connected. We're doing well here. All right. So close that. And let's, I'm going to share the document with you all so we can look at the same document together. Probably a good thing to do. There we go. Oh, let's change this to make this easier to look at. Okay. So now it's an exciting day. It's this week is Parshat Tazria Mitzorah. This is every rabbi's favorite Torah portion in the entire year. Not at all. We are looking at emissions and plague and all that fun stuff. So the beginning of the Parsha, Tazria, is about what happens after childbirth. And then there's the Mitzorah is about Tzara'at, the plague of, it's understood as leprosy, but it's not leprosy. We're going to go further into what exactly Tzara'at is today. And actually, Phil, no, I'm just going to pay attention to the participants as people come to join us on the call. So let people in. So I might pause every now and then just to admit a new person from the waiting room. Okay, so we're looking at Tazria Mitzorah, and it's a big shift from where we were last week, where we were looking at, in Parshat Shmini, we were looking at offering of sacrifices, we're looking at the death of Nadav and Avihu, right? And then all of a sudden, and kosher, a list of pure and impure animals, and then all of a sudden we have this big shift to this conversation of ritual purity and impurity by way of illness. So we're gonna, it definitely calls our attention when there's such well, I don't know if you could hear the bell ringing in the background, but it just stopped. So it should call our attention because there's something really interesting going on, and we want to know what's going on. So there are two, besides the tzara'at that can appear on the body, there are two other types of tzara'at that are mentioned, that are mentioned in the Torah portion and in Torah. By the way, side note, I'm only going to refer to it as tzara'at instead of saying leprosy or anything else, because we don't really know what tzara'at is. So to make life a little bit easier, I'm just going to keep saying tzara'at. So just for clarity's sake. All right, so the first of the two additional tzara'at is tzara'at on clothing. The section is actually a very long section of how to handle tzara'at that appears on clothing, but I wanted to share with you just the very first few verses so we could get a sense of kind of what exactly is happening. All right, so this is coming from Vayikra, Leviticus, chapter 13, verse 47 through 51. When an eruptive affection occurs in a cloth of wool or linen fabric, in the warp or in the woof of the linen or the wool, or in a skin or in anything made of skin, if the affection in the cloth or the skin, in the warp or the woof, or in any article of skin, is streaky green or red, it is an eruptive affection. It shall be shown to the priest. And the priest, after examining the affection, shall isolate the affected article for 7 days. No, not the person, but the article. On the 7th day, the priest shall examine the affection. If the affection has spread in the cloth, whether in the warp or the woof or in the skin, for whatever purpose the skin may be used, the affection is a malignant eruption. It is unclean. Okay, so let's kind of pause there for a second. This seems like there are numerous things that could kind of fit this description. We're talking about a streaky green or red. To me, it sounds like it'd almost be a mold, right? You have an article of clothing that maybe has been sitting and it was damp and balled up and thrown in a corner, right? It can develop some sort of mold on there, and then you want to go clean it afterwards, and maybe it's kind of hard to clean. But what's different here though, is usually if that's the case, if you've had something that goes moldy, when you go to clean it, the cleaning process itself, right, afterwards, you're going to probably lay it out to dry. that process should stop the spread of any mold. Because right, it's dried, it's got lots of air exposed to it at this point. You've cleaned it, so hopefully removed any spores that might have been there. So that really should stop the process, which should now tell us that, oh, maybe this is actually something weird going on. This is not just your average, mold or stain. Some of the commentary on this talks about a person whose job it is to work with certain things that might normally stain the clothing. This would be something of a color different than what they would normally maybe have, right? So if you're normally, I don't know, maybe working with bricks, so you're going to have some clay and maybe some red might work its way into your clothing, right? So then you're looking for the green, streaks versus, if you're working in the fields, maybe you're more likely to have green on you. And so therefore you're going to be looking for the red. It's not really worth going too deep into this, but I just want us to understand what this is. This is not just mold. This is going to be something strange because, again, when you clean something, it doesn't usually kind of come right back without there being, especially within 7 days, without there being some sort of conditions that should give us pause. When I lived in Jerusalem the second time, one of my roommates, actually, you all know, Rabbi Jonathan Bubis, he lived in the corner room of our flat, and there was little like black mold that would build up on the wall. And every single week, we'd sit there and we'd spray it with bleach and scrub it down, and it would just keep coming back because there's just moisture getting locked into the wall. And we knew the only way to get rid of that would be to have a space heater right by the wall and to constantly wipe down the wall all the time. That the moisture that was the condensation on the wall told us this is going to be happening. But if the wall was completely dry and there was no other, in the summertime, it didn't happen. It was only in the winter, right? So those things make sense. But when you have the Kohen come and take a look at it and make sure everything is the way it should be to not spread, then it becomes kind of unnatural the way that it would spread so much. Okay. Any questions at all? If you have any questions at any point, raise your hand by your face so I can see you. But any questions at all on this? Yes, Catherine.
Two things. One is that does this apply only to wool or linen fabrics? For example, cotton would not be included, or silk, or anything else. And secondly, what was the nature of the isolation that the priest put into effect? Do we know anything about that? I'm just curious.
Right.
Oh, and a third thing,
Yes.
I find affection an odd word to use for translating this, eruptive affection. Affection is a word I tend to think of in rather positive terms, and this is certainly not that. Anyway, all of those that you can enlighten us on, I would appreciate.
Sure. Actually, I'm going to work out of order. All right. So first of all, the word for affection here is nega. Nega, we probably would transliterate it as Nega apostrophe. Comes from the word like nogea, to touch or to arrive at. So when we say someone is shomer negia, they are someone who they are careful not to touch somebody of the opposite gender unless they're married to that person. So the word here, it's some places it's used as a plague, some places it's used as the affect, some places it's used as I don't know. I mean, there are different ways to be able to translate it, but here they're just using this. But it's the idea of the item has been touched by something. It's been affected by something. All right, so that's one. Going to the first question about fabrics, it is specifically listed here just for the for wool and linen. Cotton wasn't. I don't think we really see cotton in the Torah, and as far as, but it does also mention or leather, the skin, leather here. So it could be leather, it can be linen, it can be wool. Silk, they don't talk about silk. And actually what one sees if you look further into all the different commentaries is that there's a lot of limitations that the rabbis place on everything here. So for instance, they say it's just with the wool and linen. They say it's just in the land of Israel. It's like all these different limitations so that we don't go crazy thinking that everything's going to be tzara'at in our day, right? Especially in the day that the rabbis are writing all their commentaries, because nobody's living in Israel at that time, or very few people are. And they're always trying to limit things, so we don't confuse anything as being miraculous. And then the second question, try and remember.
The nature of the isolation.
I say. So the nature of the isolation, I'm not certain. I imagine it's the same that would happen with an individual, which is that the item is removed from being near anybody, anything, and placed, whether it's outside of camp or just somewhere nearby, so that it's not going to be touched and affected by anything. So that way it's truly isolated, right? It's like when you scrub your clothing, wash it up, and you hang it out to dry, leave it there so nothing is near it. You want to make sure it's isolated. So there's another hand. Yes, Hannah.
Thank you, Rabbi. Two questions also, like Catherine. First question is, what is the underlying theme of what's going on here? What is the underlying theme? Why are we concerned about clothing being tzara? And the second question is, how would this apply to our life today? What can we take from this that would be applicable to the way we live our life?
All right, so patience, grasshopper, to quote Rav Carradine. But be patient. We'll get there. You'll see both the relevance and the underlying theme as well. We will get there. We're gonna let it all unfold. Okay, so we're gonna shift our attention from clothing, and we're now gonna move our attention to homes, buildings, specifically homes. So this one's a much longer section because it takes a little while to get to the main point. I'm gonna read through it pretty quickly, but this is just next chapter. This is Leviticus chapter 14, verse 33. So Adonai spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when you enter the land of Canaan that I give you as a possession, and I will put a plague of tzara'at upon a house in the land you possess, the owner of the house shall come and tell the priest, saying, something like a plague has appeared upon my house. The priest shall order the house cleared before the priest enters to examine the plague, so that nothing in the house may become unclean. After that, the priest shall enter to examine the house. If, when he examines the plague in the walls of the house is found to consist of greenish or reddish streaks that appear to go deep into the wall, the priest shall come out of the house to the entrance of the house and close up the house for 7 days. On the seventh day, the priest shall return. If he sees that the plague has spread on the walls of the house, the priest shall order the stones with the plague in them to be pulled out and cast outside the city into an unclean place. The house shall be scraped inside all around, and the coating that is scraped off shall be dumped outside the city in an unclean place. They shall take other stones and replace those stones with them, and take other coating and plaster the house. If the plague again breaks out in the house after the stones have been pulled out, and after the house has been scraped and replastered, the priest shall come to examine. If the plague has spread in the house, it is a malignant eruption in the house. It is unclean. The house shall be torn down, its stones and timber and all the coating on the house, and taken to an unclean place outside the city. Whoever enters the house while it is closed up shall be unclean until evening. Whoever sleeps in the house must wash his clothes, and whoever eats in the house must wash his clothes. So, a bit heavier here. By the way, we're starting to see a little bit more relevance to our life, maybe, right? It's, we have the tzara'at with the individual, and now we have with clothing, now we have with houses. And people are being very careful, and they are entering into these spaces so not for themselves to be affected by the tzara'at, for no other items to be affected by the tzara'at. Right? We're taking this pretty seriously. It's so seriously that if it can't be fixed, you're going to tear down the entire house. So it's like going back to the example of Rabbi Bubas's bedroom at our place in Jerusalem. We wash down the walls, and we scrub them down all the time to keep it clean, so that he would be healthy and the house would be safe. But really, what should have been done is the plaster should have been torn off. The cinder block of the building itself should have been sealed and waterproofed. Then the walls should have been replastered, and everything would have been much better. But right, which is really what the Torah is telling us to do. But after you've done that, if it comes back again, then you know there's a real issue here. Right? There's something really embedded in the house. It's almost like termites. You have a little bit of termite like damage here. You do a little treatment, spot treatment, but then all of a sudden you have termite damage somewhere else. At some point you realize the entire building is just termite infested. You can ask our neighbors next door to Mishkan, who pretty much replaced every single stud of the building when they were doing construction, because there's just so much termite damage everywhere, right? Once it gets in one little place, the entire place is infected. So, but again, we're looking at something more supernatural, because right, the idea of it being greenish or reddish, it's kind of weird stuff going on. But what, by the way, would be kind of greenish or reddish to kind of impart onto a building, do you think, through the walls or anything? What material do you think? You guys can't unmute yourself, so you have to raise your hand if you want to say something. Yeah, Phil, what do you think would be greenish or reddish?
Well, it would be mold also. I mean, that would be one of the ways it could be effectuated are those colors, for sure. I mean, whenever there's that moisture that you were talking about in your place in Yerushalayim, it was a very similar thing. What was the color there, Rabbi, in your place?
Black. That was just the standard like black mold. Like
black mold, but it can come in other colors.
Yeah. So, but yeah, Roz, 1 second. Yeah, Roz.
My mother moved into an Arizona, a Scottsdale, Arizona townhouse. This is like a long time ago. And a new floor put in. And there was one part of the floor where I think it was greenish, something like a discoloration kept appearing on one part of the tiles of the floor.
Yeah.
She guarantee. So I think she made them replace it 3 times before it went away.
Wow.
I don't know what she would have done if she hadn't had a guarantee, but since she did that, and they honored it, and replacement was needed, but it finally went away.
Okay. So something else to think about. We have to think about the era in which the Torah is written, right? The age, I should say, is probably a better indicator. But iron and bronze or copper, if they are embedded in walls and used in any construction at all, also could impart green or red, right? Iron would give you the reddish rust. The copper could give you green when they're oxidizing, and right, which shouldn't really be that bad. It shouldn't spread to everything else. It shouldn't just get worse and worse and worse. The oxidation should really only be exactly where it is. But if it does start to spread, that could be a sign that something is far worse, and not just the isolated location of where building materials might actually be. Okay, so now we have this idea of tzara'at on the clothing. We have tzara'at on the home. Now the question, the more important question of really what does it all look like and all that is why? Why does one have a tzara'at at all? And so I want to take a look at what some of the rabbis have to say to get an idea of what could possibly be the cause of tzara'at. So we have a few different approaches, and so we'll see which makes the most sense to us. So the first approach here is about the Canaanites, treasure and idolatry. So the first is commentary from Rashi, where it says, "I will put a plague of tzara'at." This was an announcement to them that these plagues would come upon them because the Amorites concealed treasures of gold in the walls of their houses during the whole 40 years the Israelites were in the wilderness, in order that these might not possess them when they conquered Palestine. And in consequence of the plague, they would pull down the house and discover them. So the idea here is that we can't take any benefit from the 7 nations that were living in the land of Canaan, And therefore, if the Amorites put their treasure into their walls, we wouldn't be able to move into their houses. And so here God is saying, here's a little reminder, like you might move into a house, but that house may very well wind up having tzaraat, as a way to let you know there's treasure, Amorite treasure in your walls that you're going to have to dig out and destroy because you're not allowed to have any of that. Right? So on one hand, the Amorites thought they were being smart and outwiling us because they really thought, sure, they were really aware of what was going to be happening with us and our inability to be able to live in their homes because of their treasure, right? But that is one nice idea that we have here from Leviticus Rabbah. So it's not really that the Israelites did anything. It's just a way of God saying, oh, you missed something here. You got to clean this up too. It reminds me a little bit of Pesach, the idea of chametz, right? You want to make sure you find all the chametz, remove it, take it out, burn it, destroy it. Right. The second one here, second commentary here, is a little bit more powerful. So this is from Chizkuni saying, the line, I will put a plague of tzaraat. According to some commentators, reading the plain text, this line has to be understood in conjunction with the verse from Deuteronomy. It says, Abed ta'avdun et kol hamakomot asher avdu sham hagoyim. You certainly must destroy every place where the Gentiles have worshipped idols. How are we to know in which locations the Canaanites once worshipped idols? Answer, the plague that shows up on your house is an indication that this was a house which served such a purpose. It alerts us to the need to fulfill that commandment. So again, this is not a punishment or anything wrong. It's just a way of God saying, yoo-hoo, right here, this house, you might not realize that this was a house of worship. Right? We talk about the bamot, the high places, and it's pretty clear where you see an altar, but maybe people had a little altar set up in their home and it was destroyed or they took it out or who knows what. So here's a little reminder, this house was actually a house of idol worship. Again, it's it's nice teaching, and this could start to border, actually, no, I'm not going to go there. So either way, so we have this idea here of really the tzaraat is not so much about the individual, it's about it's about God letting us know the nature of the house, which is kind of nice, but it doesn't really connect with the tzaraat of the clothing or really the tzaraat of the body either. Your clothing probably was not clothing used for idol worship by Canaanites. So why does that all of a sudden have tzaraat on it? And your body likely was not used for idol worship. So why does that have tzaraat? So it seems strange that one of these things is not like the others. Maybe we should take a closer look. Any questions before we go on further from here? Okay, cool. So the next idea is maybe it's on account of stinginess. Sure, why not? So this is Kleakar. Kleakar is one of my favorite commentators. So we'll see what he has to say here. The answer that seems closest to the truth to me is because the main reason for tzaraat in houses is stinginess. As the sages said, whoever's house it is shall come. And this is the one who made the house exclusive for himself. Right? The reason Hashem gave him a house filled with all good things as an inheritance was to test him. Would he give from the possessions of his house to others or not? For the silver is mine and the gold is mine, says Hashem. Anything that a man gives to others is not his own. In actuality, he is giving from the divine table. Therefore, it says, when you will come into the land of Canaan, that I will give to you for possession. It is not by the power of their sword that they will inherit the land, but rather the right hand of Hashem is exalted. And that is what will give them the inheritance from the nations. There is no place for stinginess to think that my strength and the might of my hand that has accumulated this wealth for me. Therefore, it is only logical that he should give of his possessions to the poor of his people. And if he does not, I shall put the eruption of tzaraat on the house of the land of your possession. This means to say in the house that you consider to be your possession, as if you acquired it with the might of your hand. Right. So what's happening here is Kleakar is kind of taking a little bit of what Rashi is saying at first, but he's taking a bit further and saying, it's not just that there's this treasure or anything in these homes. What's happening is that you've taken this, you've acquired this house, you've acquired this land. There may be possessions, beautiful gold and treasure and other things in these houses. Don't think that those are yours. Don't think that you really did anything to earn them. And if you start to believe that about yourself, that is when I, God, am going to send tzaraat. I will put a plague of tzaraat upon you. Right? Not that tzaraat will come upon you, but I, God, will put the tzaraat upon you to teach you a lesson that you've been stingy. This is not yours to keep. Nothing, in fact, is yours. Everything is gifted to you by God. And therefore, it's your responsibility to make sure that you spread the wealth and make sure everybody is provided for. And if you lose sight of that lesson, then God will send something to help you remember. So, all right, so we're getting much harsher here. Phil, you want to say something?
Yeah, it seems to me that these are more like threats. That if you don't abide by my commandments, if you are selfish, this is what will happen. But in actuality, as to whether or not these things really happen, one way or the other, I think is very, very questionable. But as a threat, or as an, I don't know if threat's the right word, pay attention to what I'm telling you, because there's consequences for not following my laws.
Again, I mean, our discussion last week, looking at Shmini and all the different places where it says, God spoke to Aaron, right? Those were warnings. That was saying, like, you got to do what's right, and if you don't do what God expect of you, then don't be surprised when something unpleasant comes about. Right? This is a warning in advance. But this doesn't seem like, this is obviously bad. This doesn't seem all that strong. It's definitely stronger than what Rashi and Chizkuni were saying, but let's see if we can go even stronger, shall we? So let's stay here with spiritual sins. So this is Ramban, Nachmanides. And if the garment, if there be in it a pak of tzaraat, oh, here we go, pak is another translation for nega, right? So it could be plague, pak, affect. So if there's a pak of tzaraat, this is not natural at all and does not happen in the world. And so too, paks of houses. But since Israel are complete for God, shlamim, right? We're good with God. The Spirit of God is always upon them to keep their bodies and clothing and houses in good appearance. And when sin and iniquity happen to one of them, his skin or his clothing or his home becomes ugly, to show that God has departed from him. And hence the verse states, and I shall put, but natati, and I shall put a pak of tzaraat in the house, in the land of your possession, as it is a plague of God in that house. Right? So this is God saying, God being much more active. You've done something unpleasing to me, therefore I, God, am going to put this plague upon you. But notice the order, not just the order in Ramban's commentary here, but also the order in which the different forms of tzaraat appear in the parsha. You first have it on your body, then you have it on your clothing, and then you have it on your home. Right? So if we follow what Ramban is saying here, he's saying you've done something, you've done some iniquity that displeases God, so that God is first going to send tzaraat to your body, which is relatively easy to kind of conceal, right? Even if, you could, you don't necessarily want to conceal it from others, like in your family or others who may get sick from it, right? But nobody necessarily knows that you have tzaraat except for the Kohen and some others, right? Because they can't necessarily see it on your body. But then, if you still don't do anything, right? If you just kind of ignore this tzaraat and you're not heeding God's warning to you, and maybe you are in fact concealing with your clothing and not telling anybody at all, then the tzaraat is going to progress to your clothing, where then it's outward and people can see it, and you no longer can hide it at all. But still, it's only going to be the people who maybe you are encountering. And there are ways that you can kind of hold yourself. And there you kind of just kind of hug your arm a little bit so that they can't see right here. And they, well, why are you holding yourself like that? Well, my arm hurts. Who knows what, right? They're not going to be able to see that there's tzara'at on you or even on your clothing. And so if that's the case, if you still don't heed this warning from God, if you still don't do that introspection to understand what you've done wrong, why this plague is upon you, then God sends the doozy. God will send tzara'at to your home, where everyone's going to see your home. Not just the people who are passing by might see your home, but might see like from the outside if it's on the outside. But if it's on the inside of your home, all of your possessions have to be cleared out, right? Your partner, your spouse, your children, like your servants, they're not going to want to stay in this house if the house all of a sudden has tzara'at. So people are going to pass by. Well, why are they sleeping outside? Oh, well, there's something going on inside. And why all this furniture and everything, all these, vessels? Why is everything outside of the house? Because there's tzara'at inside the house. And right, that then makes you say, like, okay, fine, I had tzara'at. Okay, God, what do I need to do? And then we actually see elsewhere, I didn't bring it to any of these selections here, but you then are required to sit outside the camp for 7 days in isolation until the Kohen comes back, inspects you. And if you're clear, you're good. But if you have to sit another 7 days, you got to wait another 7 days. But here we have this idea of sitting alone for 7 days in isolation. Sounds familiar. And when you are sitting there in isolation, you've got a lot of time on your hand. And maybe it's an opportunity to be able to reflect and think, what have I done recently that maybe would have brought this upon me? Again, I want to be careful here, and I want to make sure that we are not combining the current COVID crisis with tzara'at, right? One is a physical illness, and the other, according here, is a spiritual illness. Right? Two very different ideas here. Right. So this is much stronger, I think, what Ramban is throwing at us, much more so than even what Kli Yakar is throwing at us, which is already pretty strong. So let's see a little bit further here. Oh, Kli Yakar again. Yay, I love Kli Yakar. Right. This also was not translated, so this is my translation. So I hope if it's unclear, I apologize. But I didn't want to translate the entire Hebrew because it wasn't necessary. So just focus on the most important parts here. So Kli Yakar says, plagues of clothing and houses, without a doubt, are unnatural, as there's no blood or fluid along with a bad odor or any sickness or wound. Therefore, you must say that they came by way of a miracle as a punishment. Right? So if there was something that really looked natural, like, okay, like you've got a wound, there's blood, there's other pus, and that's what the green stuff is that's coming out. Okay, like that makes sense. That's a wound. But if you don't have any of those other things, but all of a sudden you just have this weird green stuff oozing out of your skin, like out of nowhere, that should give you pause and say, whoa, what's going on? Okay. So therefore, you must say that they come by way of a miracle as a punishment. And this is the general principle for all plagues of the body, that they are unnatural as a form of punishment. And here, with plagues of houses, our sages of blessed memory say they come as suffering for appearance, suffering of appearance. But regarding plagues of clothing, they don't say anything. The best reason I can say is that they come from inflated egos, as the way of the world is to build oneself up in excess through fine dress. So just kind of stop there. So the idea here is, okay, the clothing, it's so the houses are destroyed so people can see the house, and that's a form of punishment. People can see that, but there's nothing with the clothing. So what's the reason for that then? He's saying this is your ego. You've gotten yourself very fancy clothing and you want to look really good, and so your fine clothing is going to be destroyed. Here he says, though, it doesn't necessarily happen with more simple clothing or other vessels. Right? It's only going to be like, so you could have leather, or you could have a leather vessel, which is different than a leather vest. Right? And so your leather vessel isn't going to get tzara'at, even though it's made from the exact same material as your leather vest, because the leather vessel is not to make yourself fancy. It's just to be able to carry water or wine or whatever it might be. So here the idea of clothing is we use this as a way of dressing ourselves up and making ourselves look even greater than maybe we really are. And so, yeah, let me pause for a second before I go any further with any of this stuff. Any questions of anything we've looked at here. Yes, Carol.
Well, I had written a question to the group, I guess to you though. After the isolation is over, how are the people who were isolated treated by the community?
There is a whole process to bring them in, which we chose not to go into today because there's so much one could talk about. And I'll probably talk about this a bit more on Shabbat.
Yeah.
But the process of bringing somebody in from Tzara'at is the exact same process as consecrating a Kohen for the service of God. The same type of sacrifice and the same anointing and all that. So really, the process of bringing somebody in is a really beautiful process that elevates them so much more. Because it's possible to look at somebody and just say, ugh, they're gross, and set them aside and shame them for getting the Tzarat. But once they come back in, there's this process of really celebrating them, and they are special. And they are so special, they're almost on the same level as the Kohanim, which is pretty cool. Raj, you had your hand up as well.
Well, that sounds cool, but you know, I guess here's where my point of view is maybe warped by modern science. But although I certainly approve of trying to find spiritual insights, it strikes me that a lot of this is subject to misinterpretation and to shaming things that are really the result of natural processes.
Right.
I was thinking while you were talking, for example, you spoke of skin eruptions as being hidden, but I don't know if they were subject to it, but if they had adolescent acne, would that be considered a visitation from God, for example? That's certainly a natural process.
So there are a couple different answers, a couple different points to make based on what you're saying here. So first of all, we need to resist the temptation to use our modern scientific minds when looking at Torah and rabbinic text, first and foremost, because they are different realms. They are treating two very different subjects. So that's first. Now the next thing to point out is the importance of all of these rabbis insisting that there's something unnatural about these affections, these pox, these plagues, however you want to understand them, the word nega, because yes, you could look at something and say, oh, well, that's just a cyst, right? But somebody doesn't necessarily know. And why is there kind of greenish pus oozing out of my arm or oozing out of my face? Well, people would know from cyst and say, oh, well, that's just a cyst. They might not necessarily have a word for a cyst, but they say that's a cyst, right? That is not this. But you know what? Still, we're going to lance it. We're going to squeeze everything out of it. We'll see what it looks like in another week from now. Make sure that we take good care of it, put a nice salve on top of it. Don't touch it, right? And if it does get worse, so maybe you did something to, maybe you actually touched it. Maybe you didn't listen to the instructions of the Kohen, and that's why it got worse. Who knows? And not listening to the instruction of your caregiver is a bit of a sin as well, right? You don't want to do anything that goes against the care that you're giving, that you're receiving. But the most important thing here is that these appearances are all unnatural. These are not the types of things that people would see in their day-to-day life, which sometimes people don't necessarily know all the time, which is why you would call in the specialist. You call in the Kohen, who is really like, the voodoo doctor. And he would come in and say, oh yeah, this is not like anything I've ever seen before. Or, oh, this looks just like what Shlomi had a couple weeks ago. And it's nothing, right? This is a pretty standard thing that you get, for whatever reason, right? So that's why we bring the specialist to take a look at it. All right, finally, though, the final point I want to make is the idea of isurin. Isurin it means like suffering. And so the rabbis have a whole conversation in the Talmud about, isurin ba'in latov, like, do your sufferings come for good, or are they isurim tavim alaich, I think is the word. Is the suffering good for you? Or chavavin alaich, that's it. Isurin chavavin alaich. Are they like beloved to you? Do you cherish this suffering? And the reason why the rabbis have this question, like, do you cherish your suffering? And the idea is that if you start having some sort of suffering, the rabbis say, well, look at your actions. Did you do anything wrong? And if you can't think of anything you did wrong, did you neglect your Torah study? Right? Did you maybe not do as much Torah study as you could have? And if you did do as much Torah study, then maybe that's why you have the sufferings. But if you didn't even do any of that suffering, if you didn't even neglect your Torah study, you can't think of anything bad that you did that would have brought about this suffering, then they say that, well, then the Isurin is Chavavin, is beloved, it's cherished, because that means God is sending the suffering as a way of kind of testing you. So there it's called the Isurin Shel Ahava. This is God's love to send you just a test because you've done everything else so good in your life. Here's another test to make sure that you've actually done it. It is a theology that is incredibly uncomfortable and foreign to so many people. But that is a theology of the rabbis. That is not a theology of the Torah. And so the Torah here isn't saying that your suffering is, in general in life, is because of things you've done. But the Torah is saying here that this unnatural form of suffering is a result of some spiritual transgression that you've committed. So the two very different things. Yeah, Phil.
So this is the first time that I'm seeing that because the people of Israel are bound up, as a part of God, and the Spirit of God is always upon them, that to keep the bodies and the clothing and the houses in good appearance is a part of that binding. It almost seems like this is the Balabusta warning or the Balabusta admonishment, in the sense that we are almost like a commandment. We are commanded to keep our bodies clean. We are commanded to keep our houses clean, and we are commanded to keep our clothing clean. This is the first time I'm seeing this in the, at all, and I'm fascinated by it, and I'm wondering what you think about that. I mean, you find this in other places. This is really, it's like an additional commandment.
So this is not the first time you're seeing this. I'll tell you why, right? If every Jewish parent tells their child, when they're young at least, right, no tattoos, right? Because the main reason they say Jews don't do it, but the main reason they say is because your body doesn't belong to you, it's God's, and we don't want to deface God's property. Right? Or no body piercings, or right, all these different things they say. It's one of the reasons why we say you can't be cremated, because the body's not ours, it's God's, and you want to destroy God's property. We have to take as good care of it as possible, right? Which is why the only cigarette that is forbidden to smoke is your first cigarette, according to halakha, right? Because they understand once you've smoked, the odds of being addicted, it's very difficult to stop. But it is completely forbidden to have that first cigarette. But you see plenty of Torah scholars who smoke because they've already had that one, they've transgressed the one time, and now they're just doing their bodies more and more harm by smoking more and more. But that is because they're sick now at this point. They're no longer transgressing. They're sick with an addiction at that point. Right? So, but we see this all the time, the idea that we are obligated to take good care of our bodies. We should be eating healthfully. Right? We should be doing exercise, taking care of our bodies as well as our minds, because our bodies are God's. That is not necessary to say that, well, it is possible. One read of Ramban could be that the sin is that you haven't been taking care of your body. And so God's going to send this suffering to you, right? So if you just sitting on the couch eating potato chips all day and not going out for any walks at all, and you're never brushing your teeth, and so why do you have that ulcer? Why do you have that cavity or whatever? Well, it's because you're not taking care of your body, and God sent this to you as a warning. Start taking care of your body, or it's going to get worse. Which, by the way, also is not such a horrible lesson, right? Like, I've had, my gums in the past. I wasn't flossing every day like I should have. And I went to the dentist and had my, my regular cleaning, and like, you need to start flossing a bit more, right? And so that's God sending me, one way to understand that could be God sending me this warning saying, you don't take better care of your gums, start flossing every single day, maybe you're going to have, some sort of surgery or something in the future, or maybe you're going to lose your teeth or whatever. So, right, that kicks me in the tush and gets me flossing every single day, twice a day, so not to have that ever happen again. Because once you've had a deep clean and you've had that horrible sound squeak against your teeth, right, you don't ever have that again. Right? So that is one way to understand this. If you're not taking good care of your body, something's going to happen to your body, which would be a reminder, start taking care of your body, which isn't as problematic of a message, I would think, as just saying you've done some other spiritually bereft act, and therefore we're going to send this other suffering to you, which also isn't so far-fetched. People who maybe are just mean all the time and grumpy, and they treat other people like trash, those people may suffer from stomach pains or poor sleep or other things, right? And it just becomes this really nasty cycle. But if you break that cycle and you start, trying to live a little bit nicer, better, healthier, happier, maybe some of that suffering might go away. But again, that is not to say that our bodies suffer from other afflictions that are because we did anything, right? Sometimes it is the case, but plenty of times it's not the case, which is why here in the Torah, at least, it's talking about unnatural affliction. There are plenty of things that happen naturally, which we could look at and say it's divine reward, punishment, or not. But that can be very tricky ground to walk, right? And so here the conversation is really supposed to be around something that is completely unnatural. We don't want to think that, we could, we don't want to think that anybody we see who's, injured or sick, like that they did something to deserve that. God forbid we go around thinking that. And so the rabbi is being very careful to help us avoid falling into that pit. So any other questions or? So, the takeaway then I want to just leave us with here is this idea of this, when something like just seems so bizarre and so out of place, it should give us pause and should ask us, it should demand of us really to do some introspection. What's going on in our lives? Has there been something that we've done, good or bad, that has brought about some of our affliction? And maybe it's the case that we didn't do anything, but maybe it's the case that we do some looking, we can actually come up with something. Maybe it's, we should learn that people shouldn't be eating bats or pangolin or however we pronounce that. And maybe that's why we currently have COVID, and maybe we shouldn't be eating meat, full stop. And this should be a wake-up call that the entire world should become vegan, right? Who knows, right? Maybe. Or why are we having fires all the time? Because we're not taking good enough care of our environment, and we're bringing about global warming. And right, maybe this should be a wake-up call for us. God is setting us at Tzara'at to say, take a look and make sure you're doing everything the best way that you actually absolutely can do it. And again, it may be that we find that there isn't a connection between one thing and another, but if we can find something that may be leading to our suffering, that's a call for us to try to address it so that we can rid the suffering from our own lives, but thereby also making our lives and the lives of those around us that much better. So thank you for learning with me today, everybody. I'm going to disconnect us from our streaming to Facebook. So if you're with us on Facebook, thanks for joining us.